सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै
May we be protected and nourished. May we work together with great strength. May our study be fruitful and enlightening. Let there be no quarrels among us. Om, peace, peace, peace. Namaskar. Welcome to the Interfaith University's introductory online study program in Practical Vedanta. I'm Dr. Patrick Horn, an initiated disciple in the spiritual lineage founded by Swami Vivekananda. This 10-part course explores the global history, core concepts, key texts, essential practices, and influential personalities of this ancient sacred philosophy. The topic of this session is the history of Vedanta in the West. There is evidence for inspiration from India in ancient Greek thought, innovative adoption by European Gnostics and secret societies, and interest by modern academics and seekers of truth. The United States was especially receptive to Eastern wisdom as intellectual elites and humanitarians answered the limitations of biblical Christianity and the challenges of industrial expansion with Transcendentalism, New Thought, and Theosophy, which resulted in the revival of Brahmanism in its native land and enthusiastic reception of Swami Vivekananda at the world's parliament of religions. The first teachers of Vedanta in America overcame racial bigotry, sectarian prejudice, and material adversity to establish a new tradition and diverse imitations that won the admiration and support of scholars, scientists, artists, writers, and mystics. Western culture traces its origins to the ancient Greeks, who idolized the Brahmins, the Vedic priests of India. It seems Hellenic thought derives from Vedic sources. Swami Vivekananda said, Pythagoras had come to India where he had been instructed by the Brahmins. Pythagoras came to India and studied this philosophy, and that was the beginning of the philosophy of the Greeks. Later, it formed the Alexandrian school, and still later, the Gnostic. Pythagoras learned it in India and taught it in Greece. Later on, Plato got an inkling of it, and still later, the Gnostics carried the thought to Alexandria, and from there it came to Europe. End quote. In the ancient world, truth from India was transmitted, concealed, corrupted, lost, and partially recovered into China, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Jewish mysticism, and the Roman initiatory schools that became Christianity. Pythagoras was born in the 6th century BCE and traveled the known world to study cosmology. He lived in Egypt for 20 years and was imprisoned in Babylon until he won the affection of priests with his vast knowledge. Iamblichus claims that Pythagoras studied the Brahmanas and Upanishads and adopted the doctrine of transmigration, or the reincarnation and rebirth of souls, from Brahmins, the Vedic priests. Moreover, the famous theorem on the hypotenuse of the triangle attributed to him was also given in the Brahmanas. He may also have learned about the three gunas, or conditions of nature, and 4 stages of life while in India. Pythagoras regarded food, exercise, music, and poetry as medicine. He founded a school at Crotona in Italy with the goal of individual perfection and knowledge of changeless truth in the world of appearances. The novitiate was observed in athletics and social interactions. Humor was considered especially virtuous. Before initiation, there was first a testing in a haunted cave. The beginner was expected to solve a symbolic puzzle, then faced mocking and ridicule in assembly. If these trials were passed successfully, the neophyte was allowed to listen to lessons for 2 to 5 years in absolute silence, no questions, no objections, no discussion. Pythagoras taught mathematics, geometry, harmonics, and astronomy from behind a curtain. The second step was monastic life with vegetarian diet and direct teachings on evolution, the unity of existence, the patterns of eternity, astronomical symbolism and correspondences, the interrelation of macrocosm and microcosm, and ethics. The day began with a solitary walk among groves and a temple. A morning conference would include songs, dance, dream interpretation, and a breakfast of honey. This was followed by massage and physical activity, including weightlifting and running. After lunch with guests, small groups would walk and converse on philosophical topics. The third step toward perfection included lessons on psychology and the immortality of the soul given at night by the seaside or in a sanctuary with rituals. In the fourth step, adepts were expected to act in the world with purity in body, virtue in heart, and truth in intellect. The Pythagorean doctrine, derived from the Vedic tradition and the mystery schools of Eleusis and the Orphics, inspired Plato, founder of the Academy, and Aristotle, founder of the Lyceum. Ancient historians Xenophon and Eusebius documented an encounter between Socrates and traveling Brahmins in Athens. Plato's simile of the charioteer and the horses in the Phaedrus dialogue is paralleled with an analogy in the Katha Upanishad. The lesson is given by Yama, Lord of Death. He says of the horse and chariot, "Know that the Atman, the soul, is the master of the chariot, and the body is the chariot. Know that the buddhi is the charioteer, and manas, mind, is the reins, the bridle. The senses are called the horses, the objects of the senses their paths. The soul is the enjoyer of the mind, the body, and senses. If the buddhi becomes distracted and loses its discrimination and will and desire, as a charioteer loses control of the reins, the horses will run wild to disaster." A variation of the story appears in Plato's Phaedrus dialogue. In this version, the chariot is pulled by 2 winged horses. The charioteer is the intellect, which guides the soul to truth. The white horse is the right discrimination, which follows the gods towards enlightenment, and some souls see the world of forms in all its glory. The black horse is lust and greed, which causes the soul to reincarnate in descending order of witness to truth. Philosophers and lovers, civic leaders, politicians and businessmen, physicians, priests, poets, craftsmen and farmers, sophists and demagogues, and tyrants. Plato adapts the ideal of the philosopher king from the Indian Manusmriti into the concept in the Republic. Aristotle's first cause, the unmoved mover, has a parallel in the Sankhya principle of Purusha, the conscious witness. As Herodotus cited Sanskrit grammar through acquaintance with the Ashtadhyayi, so too Aristotle's logical system has its source in a treatise sent to him from a nephew who received it from Brahmins. Aristotle's student Alexander the Great conquered Greece, Macedonia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and parts of India, where he engaged with gymnosophists and was rebuked by a Brahmin, a Vedic priest. Swami Vivekananda said, Indian and Egyptian ideas met at Alexandria and went forth to the world, tinctured with Judaism and Hellenism as Christianity. Alexandria was the capital of the Hellenistic world, and its religious philosophy was a unique blend of Platonism, Jewish Gnosticism, and Oriental ideas. When Ashoka was emperor of India 2 centuries before Jesus lived and died, Brahmins and Buddhist missionaries reached Syria, Palestine, and Alexandria as messengers of peace. Monasteries were established along the Jordan and the Nile, and the Essenes and Therapeutae won renown as mystics with superior healing methods borrowed from the Vedic tradition. The climax of the East-West exchange in antiquity is embodied in Plotinus, who studied Kapila and Patanjali and practiced Brahmanic disciplines for 11 years. His disciple, Porphyry, observed him in samadhi, unitary consciousness, on 4 occasions. Swami Vivekananda said, "It is Greece that speaks through everything in Europe. Every building, every piece of furniture has the impress of Greece upon it. European science and art are nothing but Grecian. The whole of Europe nowadays is, in every respect, the disciple of ancient Greece. The voice of Europe is the voice of ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, the fountainhead of Western civilization, sank into oblivion from the pinnacle of her glory. The vast empire of Rome was broken into pieces by the dashing waves of the barbarian invaders. The light of Europe went out. 1,000 years later, the wisdom, learning, and arts of ancient Greece entered again into Italy, overpowered the barbarians, and with their quickening impulse, life began to pulsate in the dead body of the world capital of Rome. This is called Renaissance, the new birth." End quote. The European Renaissance and Enlightenment were informed by Greek ideals of political liberty, man as measure of all things, and control of the environment for power and pleasure. The modern intellectuals soon discerned that ancient Greece was illumined by light from the East. Marsilio Ficino, Giordano Bruno, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola were all influential in the transmission of Eastern ideas, including elements of Vedanta, into the Western intellectual tradition during the Renaissance. They did so by drawing on Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and other philosophical and mystical traditions to synthesize and integrate these ideas into the evolving intellectual landscape of their time. It was assumed most Sanskrit scriptures were lost. Rare texts were hidden from public view in private libraries, Immanuel Kant collected information about India from travel books and invoked Hindu deities in his treatise on religion. He wrote, "All agree that the world began in a good estate, whether in a golden age, a life in Eden, or a yet more happy community with celestial beings. But they represent that this happiness vanished like a dream, and that a fall into evil, moral evil, with which physical evil ever went hand in hand, presently hurried mankind from bad to worse with accelerated descent, so that now, this now is also as old as history, we live in the final age, with the last day and the destruction of the world at hand. In some parts of India, the judge and destroyer of the world, Rudra, sometimes called Shiva or Shiva, already is worshipped as the reigning god. Vishnu, the sustainer of the world, having some centuries ago grown weary and renounced the supreme authority which he inherited from Brahma, the creator. Voltaire translated the Yajurveda from French to German and said, "The Veda was the most precious gift for which the West had ever been indebted to the East. I am convinced that everything has come down to us from the banks of the Ganges. Astronomy, astrology, metempsychosis, which means the transmigration of souls or the cycle of death and rebirth. It is very important to note that some 2,500 years ago, at the least, Pythagoras went from Samos to the Ganges to learn geometry, but he would certainly not have undertaken such a strange journey had the reputation of the Brahmins' science not been long established in Europe." European colonists seeking India's minerals, textiles, and spices recognized language as the key to domination. This positively led to the spread of translated scriptures in a new academic discipline of comparative philology. By the turn of the 19th century, renderings of the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads were widely available and inspired such literati as Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Henri de Balzac, William Blake, Victor Hugo, and Arthur Rimbaud. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was too literal-minded to appreciate Hindu myth, but he respected the etymological connection between Sanskrit and German, credited India's logical method as a precedent for his dialectical system, and suggested the treasures of India were tied to the fate of nations. Arthur Schopenhauer read the Upanishads and wrote, "Indian philosophy streams back to Europe and will produce a fundamental change in our knowledge and thought." He also said, "In the whole world, there is no study so beautiful and so elevating as the Upanishads." Friedrich Nietzsche was dissatisfied with the partial understanding of Vedanta in Schopenhauer's writing, so he studied the Upanishads and Manusmriti, which informed his vision of an ethical society ruled by a noble elite and the Übermensch as the supreme potential of human life. He said, "Plato seems to me in all main points simply to have been well instructed by a Brahmin. I imagine a future in whom European-American indefatigability is combined with the hundredfold inherited contemplativeness of the Asians. Such a combination will bring the riddle of the world to a solution. In the meantime, the reflective free spirits have their mission. They are to remove all barriers that stand in the way of a coalescence of human beings." Friedrich Maximilian Müller, a pioneer of comparative religion and mythology, translated the Rig Veda and wrote, "If I were asked what I considered the most important discovery of the 19th century with respect to the ancient history of mankind, I should answer by the following short line. Sanskrit Deus Pitar equals Zeus Pater equals Jupiter equals Old Norse tyr. Think what this equation implies, end quote. Comparative studies suggested not only a common origin of various languages, but universal ideals behind diverse descriptions. He also said, I spend my happiest hours in reading Vedantic books. The Vedic literature opens to us a chapter in what has been called the education of the human race, to which we can find no parallel anywhere else. In the history of the world, the Vedas fill a gap which no literary work in any other language could fill. I maintain that to everybody who cares for himself, for his ancestors, for his intellectual development, a study of the Vedic literature is indeed indispensable. There is no book in the world that is so thrilling, stirring, and inspiring as the Upanishads. Across the Atlantic, indigenous civilizations such as the Aztec, Mayan, and Inca may have been influenced by Indian mariners, whose unique cotton, dating back more than 4,500 years, was found in Peru and joins a growing body of evidence of ancient exchange. The modern era of global trade began when Christopher Columbus sailed west in search of a faster route to India. The story of Hinduism in America typically begins with the cultural impact of Transcendentalism and Theosophy, the arrival of Swami Vivekananda at the 1893 World's Parliament of Religions, followed by other gurus, and finally the influx of South Asian immigrants after 1965. However, the history begins with the Massachusetts Bay Colony minister Cotton Mather's prejudice toward heathens. Then the controversy between Calvinists and Unitarians who claimed Brahmo monotheism as a long-lost cousin of Christianity. There were racist representation of Hindus in school books intended for a national citizenry, and an emergence of metaphysical religion as a countercultural movement. To European settlers, America was the site of an appointment with destiny and an experiment in rights and opportunities. Two of the founding fathers of the United States discussed Vedic literature and esoteric history in their personal letters. John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson, Pythagoras passed 20 years in his travels in India. He conversed with the Brahmins, read the Shastra, 5,000 years old, written in the language of the sacred Sanskrit. These doctrines, sublime if ever there were any sublime, Pythagoras learned in India, end quote. American deists made comparative studies of Christianity and the Vedas as early as 1784. The early republic depended on maritime trade with India, especially cotton and rice in exchange for alcohol and metals. Sailors brought artifacts from Asia for a museum known as the Cabinet of Curiosities, a hodgepodge of items and display of luxury goods and oddities from an exotic land of enchantment. The museum represented an Orient which held the secrets of human history and that was open for scientific investigation. The widespread circulation of Sanskrit texts in translation led to the first comparative studies of religions. Reflecting Enlightenment era deist privileging of reason, Hannah Adams published an account in 1784 of Gentoo beliefs and a history of the theological disputes, arguing that the original Vedam doctrine of monotheism declined into priestcraft and idolatry. In later editions, she claimed religious diversity would end in a global moment of Christian unity. This idea was amplified by Thomas Maurice, who proposed in 1800 that similarities between the Bible and the Vedas was due to the shared origin of humanity described in Genesis. This thesis was popular among Protestants like Joseph Priestley, who located the beginning of Hindu culture at the biblical flood, but emphasized licentious superstition and violence to inspire missionary zeal. New England evangelicals regarded Hindu religion as obscene and depraved. Liberal Christians rejected Trinitarian prejudice and promoted the writing of Indian reformist Ram Mohan Roy, whose refutation of Calvinist conversion aims in Asia pulled him into a debate about Christian theology and identity in America. He spurned Hindu idolatry in favor of a monotheistic rationalism, stressed the ethical teachings of Jesus over his death on the cross, and supported women's rights. Unitarians accepted Roy as one of their own and funded a project in India that became the Brahmo Samaj. Early Transcendentalists respected Hindu religion as a metaphysical philosophy and contemplative mysticism that satisfied a need for sacred experience lacking in Protestantism. Henry David Thoreau read and quoted from Roy's translation of Vedic texts and exposition of Vedanta. Brahmanism, as conceived by the Transcendentalists, was the prehistoric spiritual ancestor of Euro-America. The American Transcendentalists abandoned Puritanism and looked for other sources of spiritual edification as the nation expanded in territory and technology. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a popular lecturer and openly preached Vedantic concepts. He wrote, "In all nations there are minds which incline to dwell in the conception of fundamental unity. This tendency finds its highest expression in the religious writings of the East, and chiefly in the Indian scriptures, in the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Vishnu Purana. Those writings contain little else than this idea, and they rise to pure and sublime strains in celebrating it." End quote. His apprentice, Henry David Thoreau, first encountered Vedanta as a student at Harvard. He edited the Manusmriti for publication and studied the Bhagavad Gita and Mundaka Upanishad during his 2 years at Walden Pond. The poet Walt Whitman wrote in the margins of the Bhagavad Gita before composing Leaves of Grass. In the late 1800s, the Gita was as accessible in the West as to the common Hindu. Madame Helena P. Blavatsky also criticized America's anemic religious culture, repressed by Christianity and disenchanted by myopic materialist science. She presented her Theosophical Society as the custodians of ageless wisdom from India and champions of a universal religion and perennial philosophy, not exclusive to Hindus. Her comparative survey, which she called The Secret Doctrine, focused on the esoteric similarities between Babylon, Egypt, and elsewhere, including Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. She claimed to receive orders from Mahatmas, great souls, who communicated through telepathy from a remote location in the Himalayas. The Mahatmas paved the way for later images of Hindu holy men in American culture and for gurus who would come to the United States in the flesh at the end of the century. The Oriental monk represented the future salvation of the West from capitalist greed, brute totalitarianism, and technological idolatry. The Theosophical Society and the Brahmo Samaj sent delegates to the world's Parliament of Religions. The organizing committee imagined religion as belief in a monotheistic God that inspires a social order of good works. Some voices, like Mormons, and Native Americans were excluded from the earliest planning stages and main event. Charles Carroll Bonney, a member of the Swedenborgian Church, represented the liberal wing that saw truth in all religions, and the Presbyterian minister Reverend John Henry Barrows represented the conservative wing that envisioned the triumph of Christianity over all religions. When Swami Vivekananda left India to attend the world's Parliament of Religions, he had no invitation or credentials and little money. Neither the Brahmo Samaj nor the Theosophical Society responded favorably to his request for support and actively opposed him. By chance acquaintance with Harvard professor Dr. John Henry Wright, he received the necessary letter of introduction to the chairman of the Committee for the Selection of Delegates. He emerged as a star speaker and crowd favorite. He received a wildly enthusiastic standing ovation when he called for an end to sectarian bigotry, irreligious prejudice, and violent fanaticism. Following the Columbian Exposition and World's Fair, he faced many difficulties in launching his missionary work, including an unscrupulous lecture bureau and slanderous accusations by jealous Christian ministers. He was given aid by Dr. Merwin Marie Schnell, chief of the scientific section at the World's Fair and founder of the enigmatic Mahachakra Society, a secret Roman Catholic fraternity. He wrote letters to newspapers exalting the Swami's preaching and popularity. He was also assisted by the Grand Master of Freemasonry, George Cooper Connor, who vouched for the Swami's Masonic degree and exhorted the association to extend a cordial welcome. It is not widely known that Swami Vivekananda earned the degree of Master Mason on May 20th, 1884. Freemasonry is the successor to the mystery schools of the Western esoteric tradition. The three ranks of apprentice, fellow craft, and master give lessons in character transformation, civic duty, and classical philosophy, reconciled with theology in an exhaustive account of ancient symbolism and religious myth. In the 24th chapter of the Morals and Dogma of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the sacred word of the Masonic initiate is given as Om. There it is written, initiation was a school in which were taught the truths of ancient revelation, the existence and attributes of one God, the immortality of the soul. The great science acquired in the mysteries was knowledge of man's self, of the nobleness of his origin, the grandeur of his destiny, and his superiority over the animals, which can never acquire this knowledge, and whom he resembles, so long as he does not reflect upon his existence and sound the depths of his own nature. Freemasonry concealed the highest truths under the veil of allegory, the more to excite the curiosity of men and to urge them to investigation. The attraction of secrecy was enhanced by the difficulty of obtaining admission. Then the multitude of emblems was explained to the candidate, the arcana of science hidden under them, and the different virtues of which the mythological figures were mere personifications, and thus he learned the meaning of those symbols, which to the uninitiated were but a maze of unintelligible figures. Swami Vivekananda claimed more than 3,000 disciples in the West and alarmed the Indian elite because he gave Diksha initiation reserved only for Brahmins. He also administered vows of brahmacharya and sannyasa in formal ceremonies. Swami Vivekananda established a structure to schedule classes and lectures, advertise, publish pamphlets and books, and manage properties and assets in New York in 1894 with the stated desire to build a temple universal, envisioned as a college of religious education and spiritual growth with branches in every major city. He said, "My idea is for autonomic, independent groups in different places. Let them work on their own account and do the best they can." End quote. In 1895, he explicitly rejected institutional procedures and hierarchy among his votaries. He said, "Each one is quite independent to teach, quite free to preach, whatever he or she likes. Individuality is my motto. I have no ambition beyond training individuals up. I again repeat, I form no sect nor organization." End quote. He prescribed this model again in 1896. He said, "As to the teaching part, my friends will go over this country from place to place, each one independent, and let them form independent circles." End quote. However, he insisted on promoting principles, not personalities. He said that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was God and all that sort of thing has no go in countries like this. Mahendranath Gupta has a tendency to put that stuff down everybody's throat, but that will make our movement a little sect. You keep aloof from such attempts. At the same time, if people worship him as God, no harm. Neither encourage nor discourage. The masses will always have the person, the higher one's the principle. We want both. But principles are universal, not persons. Therefore, stick to the principles, he taught. Let people think whatever they like of his person. End quote. He prioritized meditation, study, altruistic work, and character building. He warned against rituals and severe austerities. Swami Vivekananda inherited the American mission, established a New York center, and extensively toured the country. Swami Vivekananda told him, "California is the place where Vedanta will grow." Swami Vivekananda prophesied, "There will be a spiritual wave starting in Los Angeles and San Diego, and from this coast it will inundate the world." He also ordained monks, including Cornelis Johannes Heshblum as Guru Das Maharaj, who then joined Swami Turiyananda at Shanti Ashrama in California and later became Swami Atulananda. Appointed to the task of building a retreat center on a remote property gifted to the lineage, Swami Turiyananda was ambivalent about organization and did not restrict his students' self-determination. He said, "Why do you want rules? Is not everything going on nicely without formal rules? Let there be freedom, but no license. We have no organization, but see how organized we are? This kind of organization is lasting, but all other kinds of organizations break up in time. This kind of organization makes one free. All other kinds are binding. This is the highest organization. It is based on spiritual laws." End quote. He welcomed everybody without exception. His successor, Swami Trigunatita, constructed the first Hindu temple in the whole Western world in San Francisco. An eclectic building dedicated to the service of the truth of all religions. Its exotic facade did not resemble a traditional Indian temple, and its interior was more schoolroom than house of worship. There was a Sanskrit class, but no rituals. Unlike the previous Swamis, Trigunatita set a rigid schedule and uncompromising expectations for his disciples. He required initiates to sign a declaration and tolerated no disobedience. He gave instructions on how to continue the work at the temple after his death, and in his will, he instructed, "This temple is to be under the charge supervision, and direct management of, and its religious and other works are to be conducted by either married people who are always in good terms, or by unmarried or widowed people who will very strictly devote almost all his or her time to the spiritual culture. He also drafted rules and regulations governing Vedanta centers, open to any sincere person with the desire for truth. He imagined branches with a definite goal of improving the conditions of the mind, and stipulated group work led by a mother or father would be motivated by circumstances of public need and not attached to any personality. The direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna attracted many prominent figures of Western society. For example, John D. Rockefeller inaugurated philanthropic work after a command by Swami Vivekananda. Despite antagonism by the Theosophists, Swami Vivekananda met President Annie Besant for tea in London. She praised him as a lion and proposed friendship between their organizations. The Russian artist Nicholas Roerich corresponded with Swami Abhedananda and wrote almost 30 articles for publications of the Ramakrishna order. He visited the headquarters in India, where one of his paintings now hangs in the old monastery building. He also organized the Roerich Pact, an international agreement signed at the White House in 1935 that protects sites of historical and cultural significance during times of war. The tantric expert Sir John George Woodroffe wrote over 40 articles published by the order and was president of the Vivekananda Society of Calcutta. The psychiatrist Sigmund Freud based his idea of the oceanic feeling on the recorded experiences of Ramakrishna. Carl Jung visited the Mott headquarters and discussed spiritual topics with swamis on 4 different occasions. The behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner cited Ramakrishna as the example of compassion based on metaphysical unity. Swami Vivekananda demonstrated samadhi, or unitary consciousness, to the Harvard professor William James. The inventor Nikola Tesla learned of Vedantic cosmology from Swami Vivekananda and attempted to give a mathematical demonstration. Thomas Edison received lessons in cosmology and meditation from Swami Abhedananda. The disciples of Ramakrishna's direct disciples successfully developed the presence of Vedanta in the modern West. Swami Ashokananda expanded the Northern California work with new construction in San Francisco, Berkeley, Sacramento, and retreats in Lake Tahoe and Marin County. He forbade Western devotees from worshiping Hindu deities and trained monastics using techniques borrowed from Catholicism. Swami Prabhavananda produced eloquent translations of Sanskrit scriptures for a general audience and built the tiny Taj Mahal in the Hollywood Hills, where he was surrounded by eminent writers such as Christopher Isherwood, Aldous Huxley, and Gerald Heard. Monastic training in Southern California was open and informal.
In New York,
Swami Nikhilananda instructed J.D. Salinger. The mythologist Joseph Campbell served as the Society's president and edited the English translation of the Sri Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita, or the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. When Swami Satprakashananda faced racial discrimination in St. Louis, the popular scholar Houston Smith acted as frontman for a real estate transaction. The 1893 World's Fair in Chicago envisioned in the Columbian Exposition an electrical future technopolis of abundant material prosperity, and the world's parliament of religions aimed for liberty, rights, and opportunities, so all could live in the conditions favorable for the fulfillment of human potential and spiritual realization. Swami Vivekananda believed that the United States has a special task in bringing forth the highest spiritual truth for the world. In the 20th century, the philosopher Oswald Spengler foresaw an overthrow of science and revival of ancient religions in the 21st century. The historian Arnold Toynbee also predicted renewal of religious experience and an advance of interfaith dialogue due to the breakdown and dissolution of society caused by technological idolatry. The Orientalist view of history imagines the world united by a rebirth of the Vedic tradition in the West. Swami Vivekananda suggests that all religions feature a combination of principles, mythology, and ritual. His ideal religion unites science, philosophy, and poetry. He praised variation and individuality and said, "Our watchword then will be acceptance and not exclusion. We take in all that has been in the past, enjoy the light of the present, and open every window of the heart for all that will come in the future." End quote. He outlined a plan of deliberate spiritual development when he wrote, "Each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details." Aldous Huxley, co-founder of the Happy Valley School with Annie Besant and Krishnamurti, emphasized the Vedantic concepts of the Philosophia Perennis in a minimum working hypothesis. There is a Godhead, which is the unmanifest principle of all manifestation. It is simultaneously transcendent and immanent. It is possible for humans to love, know, and become identical to Godhead. Unity with Godhead is the final end and purpose of human life. There is a law to obey if this end is to be reached. Gerald Hurd, author of Training for a Life of the Spirit and founder of the Trabuco College of Prayer, maps 3 phases of spiritual evolution: the novice, who purges for catharsis; the proficient, who is enlightened and free; and the perfect, established and integrated in the vision of God. He writes, "To change the focus of consciousness is difficult and skillful work. It does not happen by accident, nor by simply leaving the mind open." End quote. He outlines 3 ranks within a monastic society. First, the learners, who serve the senior monks without rule or direction. Second, the educated, residents with a general discipline and specialization, alternating solitude with group rituals, gardening, and household duties, especially in the dining hall. Third, the doctor proficient, who heals by teaching, a Neo-Brahman and Bodhisattva, unrestricted by cloistered vows, the incarnate goodwill and conscience of mankind, and the answer to the powers that hypnotize and destroy. According to the prospectus Hurd drafted in collaboration with Huxley, Trabuco College of Prayer facilitated transformation of character through 1, open-minded inquiry; 2, literary research and personal integration; and 3, experiment with techniques and the application of the most auspicious methods as a daily routine. The founders imagined a self-sustaining center where residents live simply and work in the garden or perform other duties according to capacity and strength. No fee was required of genuine associates, who were envisioned as guests and the school as their headquarters. The college was dedicated to peaceful lovers of truth and freedom, as a place for the study of mysticism, the advancement of arts and science, and other social services. The Trabuco College of Prayer inspired the human potential movement and was donated to the Vedanta Society of Southern California. The Ramakrishna Order and Vedanta Society do not aggressively proselytize or recruit. The heroic path requires perfect sincerity, gigantic intellect, and strong will for personal liberation and the welfare of the world. Initiation involves both an introduction to the ideals, practices, and history of the lineage, and also private counseling, personal instruction in meditation and other disciplines, and transmission of spiritual power from an unbroken succession of teachers. The initiated disciple must be obedient to the guru's directions in a simple lifestyle of religious pursuits and service, with holy company for support, encouragement, training, and guidance. Members attend lectures, classes, private talks with the swamis, and enjoy library privileges and a vote in business meetings. Some welcome newcomers to study groups and meditation centers, giving guided tours of the center and the history of Vedanta in America and in that location, introducing activities, events, reading suggestions, and inviting guests to meet the senior Swami. Some are ritualists who perform the daily temple ceremonies and occasional worship. Those who complete a course of study with sufficient years of practice may lecture, and qualified teachers may give introductory meditation instructions and spiritual consultation. Some are employed in the work of a center or reside in sub-centers, and others are independent with families and professional obligations. No group constraints. Go anywhere and do anything. Allow for exceptional talent to make a unique contribution to the world and influence all sectors of society with spiritual ideals. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace.